So let me just introduce myself. My name is Michael Diegelmann. I'm the co-founder of the Global ESG Monitor, together with my business partner, Ariane Hofstetter. She is responsible for the methodology and the research. And we're happy that you all joined our call. Today, we are going to talk about the strengthening of the social reporting, and we will present you the results and cases based on our research where we analyzed over 190 companies from Europe and how they tackle social topics and transparency to that crucial topic in our society. So let me quickly introduce the Global ESG Monitor. We are doing that research since 2020. We have analyzed more than 1,300 reports, over 500 companies from 4 continents. And what our clients and our media partners always enjoyed and liked was that we were able to prove our research because we have a methodology which is very transparent. Let me just explain it on the next slide. So basically we have translated the ESRS, IFRS, GRI, UNGC, TCFD, the supply chain law, and own criteria into a questionnaire, which has more than 1,000 questions and more than 5,000 variables. And this methodology is adapting to the material topics defined by corporates in their annual report or their separate ESG report. And those 2 documents are the only documents that we are analyzing. That means that we do not analyze any websites, any marketing brochures, any social media channels, just the official reporting. And then we do not use any artificial intelligence. We depend on our great research team. We have a total of over 42 analysts, and we have chosen to go a 3-way approach to assure best quality data. That means that analyst 1 is going through the questions, and analyst 2 is doing exactly the same. And if they have a mismatch in the answers, then our audit team comes in and is overruling either analyst 1 or analyst 2. And in this year, we have analyzed 194 companies, 160 from the DAX, MDAX, and SDAX. That's the lead indices on the German Stock Exchange, and another 34 from Europe and 1 from the United States. So based on this research, we will present you the results on the social reporting. Before I go into details, or Ariane is taking over, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom call if you have any questions, or you can send me emails or WhatsApp, who have my number. Then I will interrupt Ariane and ask her the question. Then, therefore, I will turn off my camera. If you see me again, that means I have a question. So, Ariane, please take over.
Thank you, Mike. For the next 30 minutes, I thought it could be the most interesting to present a mixture of background information with a focus on ESRS, the European regulations for sustainability reporting, and some use cases to make transparent how those abstract disclosure requirements are turned into practical reporting in our sample. And I want to begin with the structure of the S column. And you see here that it's a stakeholder-centristic approach, which EFRAG has chosen. And compared to the environmental pillar, they could not rely on the European taxonomy. They had to rely on a number of different other regulations and requirements. And one is already very often in reporting, which is the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. But you see the list is quite extent of what has been considered when compiling the social pillar. What is interesting, if I'm talking about a stakeholder-centristic approach, is to see the different definitions of stakeholders here, which also come from ESRS. One is the affected stakeholders, And those are the ones addressed in the topical standards, S1 for own workforce, S2 for workers in the value chain, S3 for the affected communities, and S4 for consumers and end users. And on the other hand, the users of the sustainability statements, which are the primary users or those users who are financing the Green Deal, which are investors, for example, creditors, asset managers, and so on. And those users which are able to make companies reliable for their actions, which can be civil society or NGOs. And you see it's a very broad approach on distributing responsibility here amongst stakeholder groups. The next I want to show you as a background information is the structure of the social pillar. You again see the four topics with the different stakeholder groups, S1, S2, S3, S4. And the overarching goal is to prevent harm to people and to strengthen human rights. So human rights are in every topical standard here. And if you do your materiality analysis, it's really important that you take into consideration that in case of potential negative impacts on human rights, severity takes precedence over probability. So there is a different approach on the thresholds which you have to consider. Also, we wanted to show you that on the level of subtopics, which are the gray bars, the structure is very similar. The same is true for the disclosure requirements, which are sometimes the same wording in the different topical standards. Why is this the case? Because of the stakeholder-centristic approach on the one hand, but also on harmonizing and unifying reporting in the area of the social pillar. As you can see here, when I talk about materiality and I'm introducing those four different standards, you will assume, or you already know, that these are subject to the materiality assessment. That means that the companies only have to report extensively on them if they have defined materiality. So let's look on our sample and how often they have identified the different social topics being material. And you can see own workforce is quite often a material topic. Only in one case it was not, which was a company with a great number of employees, which was kind of surprising for us. The other ones, they are not as often material, especially little materiality frequency for affected communities. Only 18% of our sample have said that this is a material topic area for them. So when we look at those numbers, we have to take into consideration the reasons why. And we think one reason could be that those three topics are subject to phase-in, meaning that companies with less than 750 employees, which are 15 in our sample, have time to adapt to those requirements. In general, it's about 2 years of time they have. So that can be one of the reasons. The other one has probably to do with the definitions, which I will introduce in a second. On average, 2.3 social topics out of the 4 were material. So we can see that the social pillar is, although we have changes to expect, pretty dominant in our sample. We assume that affected communities will have larger numbers in the future. That has to do also with the dependencies on biodiversity, for example, or climate. If you read ESRS, you can see that you have to consider affected communities when having materiality in one of those topics. One can easily understand if the climate changes or the ecosystems change, that communities living there will be affected. The pictures in Germany or in Florida have given impressive statements of those effects. we did not only measure frequency of materiality, but also the performance in these topics. And that is what we have displayed here. So in total, you could reach for every social aspect 100% of the 100% points. And what you see here in the pie charts is the amount of points in average which were reached, 46% for own workforce, but the spectrum was really broad. The minimum was 5 points, the maximum was 89 points. You see that quality in reporting is really diverse in our sample, meaning that we have some shining examples and also some examples which have quite some work to do in order to comply to ESRS. Workers in the value chain, consumers, end users, and affected communities, they are in the 30s, 31 for affected communities, and workers in the value chain, and 36% for consumers and end users. So there is quite some work to do for the companies having identified materiality in these topics. When we thought about how to present you the results, we went back to the similar structure of those topical standards and also of the way we measured quality in reporting in those areas. And so we decided to group the results into identify, engage and assess, integrate and act, and track. The overarching goal is to communicate the results of those different stages. You see it's a circular movement because it's something which will be under constant change and monitoring for the companies. And the idea, and that's also in CSRD in describing the due diligence process, is that the companies in the social pillar should demonstrate how they identify, monitor, prevent, mitigate, remediate, or bring an end to the principles and potential adverse impacts connected to those social topics. I will start with identify, and this is all about who is affected and who is important for the topic. And we will start with showing you the groups along the value chain. So with ESRS, the value chain reporting came into place, which is considering own operations, downstream and upstream activities. And we will start with the employees and contractors for own operations and go later to the other groups. What is really important for own operations is the differentiation between employees, which are in the sphere of responsibility for the company. That's really easy. More or less easy are the contractors, which are per definition also to be counted for the companies who employ them. So there was a discussion if this is a double counting or not. Due to the German law to treat both groups equally, there are good reasons to combine them under own operations and under own workforce. So how good do the companies report on this? On the left side, you see the share of companies specifying their workforce in these two groups. We have calculated different aspects of our data, and you see 95% of the companies, they give details on employees' demographics and specifics, but on non-employees, it's only 16%. And if you take into consideration that EFRAG also explained that there is no definition of employee provided by EU law, it's really important to define the two groups to make it also accessible as an information for international stakeholders who might not be familiar with national law and practices. Also in terms of this German law, which I have explained that both groups should be treated equally, it's really important to show that this was taken into consideration, or also to demonstrate if those kind of workers are a topic for the company when defining materiality in this area. Best practice I brought for you for the non-employees and is from Porsche. So you see that we have picked out 2 pages from the annual report of Porsche AG, which is page 126 and page 455. One is describing qualitative, the working condition for non-employees, defining that they are temporary workers, that Porsche adheres to German legislation, and they describe their approach for equality in this area. And then later they give specific quantitative numbers for them, breaking them down by area in the company, by region, or by gender. So doing this, you have 2 ways of explaining materiality and groups which are considered in this process. And we thought that's a nice way of demonstrating how this really abstract terms, which I have just presented to you under the label of identifying, can be put out in a report. Let's take a look at the value chain workers. They have to be found, as I said, downstream and upstream of the company. And also for this group, there are definitions, which we have put on the slide on the right side for you. And you see that for the percentage of companies explaining how they have identified value chain workers who are at greater risk of harm, we have only 14% of companies who further disclose this information. 85% do not give any details on this. So the right side is a good idea to define it, to make it easy for the companies to identify the groups, but for the stakeholder trying to understand what was taken into consideration, the information at the moment is too limited. Mike, you have a question?
Yes. So does that mean that the corporates value the own workforce more than the workers in the value chain?
I don't think it's a question of valuing a group more than another, but I think the own employees, they are closer to the company, they are within their control. You have already processes for headcounts, for example, and different other rates, which I will describe a little bit later on. For workers in the value chain, that's new, especially due to the broader definition of value chain processes. So I think it has more to do with regulation and a new approach than with valuing the different groups.
How can companies get more data about workers in the value chain?
That's a difficult one. We call it in German the chicken egg problem. What is first? To report on value chain workers, I need data from my suppliers, for example. If they don't give me that data, I cannot say anything about them. One has to start, one has to compile the data, and with the decision of EFRAG to widen the approach to value chains, it will be an approach which will come to the companies, which will provide the data in order to report, to identify which data is specifically needed in each case. We recommend to look at best practice examples or examples from your peer group to understand what kind of data they collect, or do a benchmark with your benchmark report with your suppliers to see what they report on. That gives you an impression on what kind of data is available and helps you to overarch this time where everybody is getting ready for compiling data and we have not unified data yet.
Thank you.
Next to groups, here I only want to point out the specific affected communities. They are to be found along the whole value chain, so also in own operations as well as in downstream and upstream activities. They are not necessarily only the neighbors, but those who are affected by the undertaking, respectively by the undertaking's value chain. And for consumers and end users, we know that many companies ask themselves, what's the difference to customer orientation? That's what we do the whole time. When we want to sell our products, we need to think about our customers. But this goes beyond. It's also analyzing moral, societal, and regulatory perspectives. So there is more to take into consideration than the classic customer orientation here. As I said before, those are subject to phase-ins, but be aware that those who have to report first might ask you if you are under those companies or amongst those companies who can use those phase-in times, that you need to provide the data more early than you expect, because you are required by other actors in your value chains to provide this data. Next step, we have identified, and now we come to engage. The engagement process is really important for the social topics because, as I said, it's a stakeholder-centric approach. If you take your stakeholders in the center of your analysis and data collection, you have to understand their needs and expectations. And for that, we have the stakeholder engagement processes on which the companies have to report on. And what we did here is to group the data for the 4 topics. And the pie chart on top shows you the percentage of companies who describe the engagement processes, which are in the lowest case, 56% for affected communities, in the highest case, 76% for own workforce. That's something you will see throughout my whole presentation, that own workforce as well as consumers and end users have higher quotes on reporting. Also, when it comes to details, that's what we have shown below. We have marked those bars black when they reach more than 50%, meaning that more than every second company is providing this information. And what is it all about? It's not only important that I describe or explain that I have engaged my stakeholders, I have to make transparent the way I did it. So I have to describe the methodologies, the processes, assumptions, the monitoring I used. Let's talk about workers in the value chain or own workforce. For example, I have to demonstrate that as well as in whistleblowing, those engagement processes had also steps for them to give information without fear of being repressed for those information. That's really important for the companies to take or to get a broad picture of the information they collect. If they don't do it, if they only talk directly to the stakeholders, it might be the case that they only get to hear what they want to hear and not what it's necessary to hear and to take into consideration. That's why those details are important. That's why we're analyzing them here. And that's also why ESRS is asking for more details on this engagement process. Also for this, we have brought a use case. This one was selected from my team for SAP. And what you can see here are 2 screenshots from their integrated report, page 263 and page 104. And we have aligned those 2 screenshots to the aspects I have just showed to you and marked those which have been fulfilled. And you see they describe their approach to engage with their stakeholders very broadly. They have structured approaches like surveys, structured services, and they have more informal processes like a coffee corner, which is held on a regular basis and which also is one form of engagement. So they describe it and they combine it on page 104 with different indexes to show the results of it. One example is the Employer Engagement Index. Another one could be, and that's also then one of the numbers, the Net Promoter Score for employees, the ENPS. Next step would be to assess. And also for the different topics, as you know it already, again, those 4 different topics right next to each other, the pie chart showing the percentage of companies who communicate the results of their materiality assessment. So we have chosen materiality assessment as one of the examples for assessing. And you see that all the companies who have identified materiality here also provide details on the materiality assessment, or the major of the companies, I should rather say. And then again, the bars giving the details and what kind of details. You see that for own workforce and consumers, there are more details provided than for workers in the value chain or affected communities. Here, we only find overall results disclosed more commonly. For the other two groups, we have closer definitions, for example, for details on stakeholder engagement, for material impacts, material risks, material opportunities, or for the nature of activities or business relationships. All information which are important for stakeholders to understand those results and which can be communicated. Also here, a use case. This one is from Ørsted, coming from their annual report. And we have chosen this for two reasons. One is that Ørsted has already published an ESRS report. And what you see here is the overview for S1 and S3, own workforce and affected communities, displaying the topics, the quality of, is it impact, negative, positive, a risk, an opportunity, and descriptions. And this way does not cover everything in one place, as you can see from the check marks we have on the right side, but it introduces stakeholders to materiality in this case, giving them a good approach to enter a more detailed reporting and understand why materiality was defined and what aspects caused a materiality definition in this area. Next step would be integrate and act. Mike, you have a question.
Ariane, before we go into the next topic, yeah. I know you're a great fan of the report of Ørsted, the Danish company, but a more general question to the affected community issue. Mm-hmm. How can companies actually get information and data, especially when they operate in countries where there is no political or social rights for those communities yet? How does that work?
That's really difficult. And we see that it's not very common in reporting. For example, when we talked to our analysts about their findings and their qualitative insights, we learned that, for example, the topic of Xinjiang in China is only addressed once or twice in the reports, but not more often. We would have expected, due to the company selection we have in our sample, that there were more companies talking about this. It is a value chain topic, but it's also a topic which addresses affected communities in a wider sense. So we understand it's difficult. We understand that data is needed. But as I said, it's the chicken egg problem. One has to start, and responsibility has to start. We know that in Germany, due to the regulations and the traditions and the democratic approach we have a more easy situation than in other countries. But if companies act global, they need to take global responsibility too.
Thank you.
If I say something like that, I don't want to make the impression that I think it's easy and I'm having the moral finger here. I'm just trying to give the bigger picture why it's important and why this regulation comes, and also the opportunities it can bring. And one opportunity is to integrate those insights and act. Why is it an opportunity? Because if you have a reputation risk and you identify it, it's a chance to do something about it. Or maybe you see that you are positioned very well in an area in which can be communicated to your stakeholders too. So I'm a big fan for green light thinking. Results. We we chose from the various data points, we have the integration of materiality analysis into decision-making processes and controls. And the pie chart shows you, again, the percentage of companies, showing you that the least result is 68% for affected communities, the maximum, again, for own workforce with 81%. But only for own workforce, we get more details. So a split information on how it informs decision-making processes and how it strengthens internal controls. In the other areas, we have more a general reporting about it, or in connection to consumers and end users, more an information decision-making process-oriented approach. The next example is the action plans. So action plans, that's a more common connection here. We have combined two questions. On top, you see the percentage of company disclosing detailed information on their action plan. And you see that the reporting in this area for own workforce is quite well, whereas in the other areas, there is more room for improvement, especially when it comes to details. For affected communities, a lot of not disclosed, and when it comes to more details, then it's more narrative information. For own workforce, we have details also on qualitative and quantitative process of past actions. There could be more information on completion time horizons or the results for remedy provision in case those actions do not work out. So a quite broad spectrum, again, which is connected to different actions and has to be reported. But it's not enough to show what one is doing, but also how these measures contribute to targets, and to also break these down into small actions and to report on what is reached within those smaller actions. So it's coming from page 9 and page 84. And you see that you get, on the one hand, an overview and scope of actions and targets, also a completion rate and time horizons for these targets. And these qualitative descriptions are combined with quantitative, numerous information, which helps to understand or to track the progress of the company in these areas. Next step is track. There we chose the percentage of companies who communicate the effectiveness of its engagement. We could have chosen track the results through targets, but we thought that this is more interesting because it's not as common in reporting yet. So since we have a stakeholder-centristic approach to the S topics, it's also important to demonstrate how you assess the effectiveness of these processes. And we see the ENPS is one example, that in own workforce, we have 67% already giving some kind of information. It's mostly in general terms. In the other areas, workers in the value chain, affected communities and consumers and end users, this is not as common yet. So there can be more information delivered on it. And with these results, I am at the end of my presentation and open to question. Mike, do we have any questions?
Well, maybe you can explain a bit more about the best practice. So the benchmarking, what can companies do to learn from others?
Yeah, what I showed is our descriptive data, and this descriptive data gives you insights on what to do and how well companies are doing this. What we also can do is to analyze this data for different peer groups, different benchmarks, and the companies we have evaluated, they are able to choose their own peer groups And those peer groups can be competitors, they can be companies in their value chain, depending on the need of information. And then we can identify what kind of information is reported. And we do this on a descriptive level, showing how many companies deliver a certain information, but we also do it on an individual level where we show where to find the best practice examples from which companies we can learn from, because that's also something which is emphasized from the Global Reporting Initiative as well as from EFRAG. We have best practice examples out there, those companies who are still in the beginning of their journey to sustainability reporting have a lot to learn and a lot of possibilities to accelerate their learning processes.
Thank you, Ariana. So again, if somebody has a question, use the Q&A tool in the very bottom. If not, I would like to point out for tomorrow, we have another webinar on the governance issue, how the G in the ESG is gaining momentum. Same time, same place. Feel free to join, invite your colleagues. And yes, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and hope to see you then tomorrow.